So, the audit findings, Ken Koch.
Yes,
Audit
the
findings.
auditors come up to the
Are
microphone.
there any auditors in the room?
Yeah, I don't know how we're going to follow up all this exciting talk with talk about the audit, but we're going to try our best. Do we have a? Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
We'll get to it.
Yeah.
Calm down, Linda.
All this discussion is very hard to follow. Okay. All right, great. Well, thanks for having us tonight. I'm Tara Leia. I'm a director with RSM. Since we were here at this presentation a year ago presenting the results of the audit, our firm has changed its name. So we're the same firm, just a different name, and that's all that it was. No restructuring or anything. Just kind of a rebranding effort. So I'm here with Matt Shipley. He's the manager on the audit, and we're just going to present to you a little bit about the financial results for the year ended June 30, 16, both from a financial perspective and the results of the audit. So I'll dive into it. Is there a clicker? I'm sorry. Okay, so here's our agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about the team, recap the results of the audit, like I said, the required communications letter that we issue, as well as the single audit compliance report that we issue. A couple things about the team. I already talked about myself and Matt being part of the team. We're repeating on the audit this year. We like to say that we retain a lot of our team members from year to year. That's helpful, you know, in the audit process and kind of beating that learning curve. So a lot of the team members that you see there, Jeremiah, Jessica, Michelle, Dan, those are all people who have been involved in the audit in previous years. John is a new addition to the team this year. He's a partner that we have, you know, kind of wanted to bring you a partner level person to make sure that you've got somebody at that level assigned to your audit in case there's any, you know, things that come up at that level. So just a quick recap here, financial audit results. The good news to share is that all of the audit opinions that we are planning to issue after this meeting are clean. We also call that unmodified. So the reports that we issue are not going to be modified for any except for any kind of modifications for problems that we found or things like that. So very clean audit, which is great. The audit opinions that we will issue that you'll see in the CAFR and you have in your materials is a report on the basic financial statements. So that's the report on the district as a whole. Also the report on the audits of the ICCB grant programs. You have several ICCB grant programs that require special auditing and compliance testing that we do as part of our audit. So those were clean as well. A report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. That's related to your federal program. Your federal programs, I should say, of which we audited student financial aid as the big program. And then a report on the schedule of enrollment data, and that's a requirement by ICCB that you have testing done on the enrollment data that you're putting out to support that these numbers that you're all talking about, you know, for enrollment are accurate as they're coming out of your system and being reported correctly. So that everything there was good. And we also perform a separate audit on the College of Lake County Foundation. The foundation is reported as a separate component unit within the college's financial statement, so you'll see it referenced there. We also issue a separate audit report under a separate cover for the foundation, and we'll be presenting to their board at the end of, in the middle of November. So we'll have a slide that recaps a little bit of that as we get into the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt. Matt's going to walk through a couple of the financial slides that recap some of the financial results from the year.
Thanks, Tara, and hello again. I know I saw that John and I were out here in June, kind of at the beginning of the audit process. So here we are at the end, kind of wrapping it up and presenting our results. And as Tara mentioned, we'll start with the financial results of the college. We're going to look at this at really a high level and go through it pretty quickly, primarily because we really didn't have any audit adjustments or significant issues. So the numbers should be really consistent with what the board's been presented throughout the year from Ken and the accounting department, as well as I know Ken's going to present on the fourth quarter information after this. So real quickly at a high level, we'll start with the operating funds, which are the education and O&M funds of the college. As you can see, revenues, the top line there did decrease by about 3.6% or about $3.5 million. The main driver of that, as I'm sure everybody at the board level is aware, is the state funding situation. ICCB grant funding decreased from $8.6 million in 2015 to $3.3 million in 2016. So that's about a $5 million decrease. When you factor that out, then total revenues actually increased slightly. So that's really the main driver of that decrease in revenues. The college expenditures increased slightly, as you can see, by about 1%. And fortunately for the college, that still resulted in a positive operating income coming out of the operating fund. So despite the decrease in funding, I think it's a good story for the college to say that number is still positive, and there's still an amount able to transfer out of the operating funds at the end of the year. The transfer for 2016, as you see, was about $5.3 million, and that transfer is primarily going into the restricted fund for use in the college's capital projects. So, and that's a similar purpose that the transfer in 2015 was for as well. As a result of the operations, ending fund balance for those two funds was about $31.3 million June 30th, 2016. So here, just to summarize kind of the fund balance and what that number represents, board policy that's documented and been approved by this board is to maintain the unrestricted fund balance of at least 25% of budgeted operating expenditures. That's pretty consistent with what we see with our other governments and colleges, so I think we think that's a good number and a good place to start for college. And as you can see, for 2016, the college ended at 33%. So we met that goal as set in the board policy. That converts to about 4 months of yearly expenditures and transfers, and then as you can see with the positive change, fund balance increased about 2.2% in the current year. Next, we just wanted to highlight some of the auxiliary funds. We know, these are a focus of the board and the accounting department, I know as well. So total revenues in the auxiliary funds decreased about 7% to $10.3 million. And along with that, total expenditures decreased by about the same amount as well. And that's primarily the bookstore operations. Both revenue and expenditures for the bookstore decreased by about $800,000 during the year, which I think represents almost all of that decrease. So once you factor out the bookstore, the remaining auxiliary funds were pretty flat from the prior year. Again, operating income for auxiliary funds was positive, and they did finish with a positive fund balance. So we are managing those activities at a break-even basis, or maybe slightly above that. The final piece of the financial numbers that we wanted to emphasize was the net position for all funds of the college. So this is all funds combined. This is the net position as of June 30, 2016. And you'll see again an increase of about $7 million across all funds, and a little bit of a change in the classification between the three buckets shown. So net investment in capital assets stayed relatively flat between the 2 years, but what decreased is the restricted for specific purposes number, and that's really as we've spent down some of the funds that were restricted for capital purposes, that amount's being released. So at 2015 we had $12.5 million restricted for capital projects. With some of the significant activity that the college has had over the past year, that number went down to $1.5 million. So that's the primary driver of that decrease in restricted purposes. And as a result, that increases the unrestricted net position of the college. So overall, the net position of the college is fairly strong, and I think that's shown here. And again, we do show an increase in net position year over year when factoring in all funds as well. Again, we didn't really have any audit adjustments, or we had no audit adjustments, so hopefully the financial information is pretty consistent with what Ken will be going into in a bit more detail shortly. But if there are any questions, we can be available to answer that, or Ken as well. So. With that, I'm just going to turn it back to Tara to cover some of the required communications and then the compliance reports we issued as well.
Okay, so kind of bringing it to a close. What Matt just said is a good segue into kind of, we have to do a letter. The audit standards require that we issue a written letter of how the audit went. Were there audit adjustments? Were there any uncorrected misstatements? Were there disagreements with management? It's a very standard format letter, but if there was any of those things that came up as a result of the audit, we would have to communicate those. So I can say that that communications letter is one of the cleanest that you can get. You can see here in the second bullet, no audit adjustments. And we've said that a couple times, but what that really means is that management was able to reconcile the books and records and close out the year June 30, 16 without us having to come in and clean anything up. So we were presented a clean trial balance without having any adjustments that we proposed. And that's excellent. That's as good as it gets right there. And especially since you've had some significant turnover in some key people in the audit process this year, I think that's a wonderful testament to how good controls and a good foundation you have in place for that. Also, no uncorrected misstatements. I've used that word a couple times. That's really just if there's something that's not quite material enough to adjust, but if there's something that looks a little off, it's above a certain threshold, we have to, we call it pass it and just communicate it to you, but we don't book it. We didn't even have any that rose to that level, so that's excellent. There is a copy of the control deficiency letter that we issued. We call this the management letter. We've issued one of these in previous years, and this is just internal control recommendations for things that we find as we're doing the audit process. So there were 4 items that we identified this year, and let me just say that the control deficiencies are the lowest level of deficiency that you can have reported by your audit firm. The next level up is a significant deficiency, and the highest level is a material weakness. So you can see in the second to last bullet, no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses this year or last year were noted over financial statement controls. But the 4 that are listed here, I don't know if we need to go into too much detail. They're pretty, we tried to be pretty self-explanatory on them, and we discussed them with management at our exit meeting for the audit. Talked about corrective action, and when we issue our letter, management's responses to those points as to what their corrective action is and the status of those will be included for your review. So there's no questions there. I'll just kind of wrap it up by just reiterating that management has been proactive in addressing deficiencies identified in the audits, as long as we've been involved.
I want to point out one other thing. I probably was a little bit remiss in my own remarks is in the past, the board will remember, especially longtime board members, there had been some issues in financial aid. Maybe Dr. Heaney could talk about that a little bit, but clean bill of health.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, just couldn't be happier with Karen Lavin, Aaron Fowles, the financial aid team, just doing an outstanding job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've got a great team in the financial aid.
And that's hard not to have some little thing that you find it financially. So,
yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, we had that for a number of years. I know Karen took that by the horn and along with others as well, and got that straightened out.
That's great.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can we go back to the numbers? We're talking about the net position.
Yeah.
Net
Sure.
position here. I see the unrestricted has increased almost 20 million, really about 18.9, and the restricted is decreased by about 10. What are the other items that is pulling up the unrestricted amount? Because we're talking about probably $7 or $8 million, or so I know that once the project gets properly funded, it's going to transfer from the restricted, the capital projects, to the unrestricted. But there still is about $7 or $8 million of unrestricted bump from 2015 to 2016. Big picture, what is that?
Yeah,
I think we covered in the operating funds did have a positive change in the current year.
I can understand. I mean, if the bookstore is not if it's not performing, what other kind of operational bump are we experiencing that we?
Isn't this mostly the funds that were then transferred in for projects from the fund balance? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, this slide specifically includes all funds of the college.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's gonna reflect the positive change in fund balance for all the funds.
Right.
So I think the two operating funds we covered earlier is going to be probably the main driver of that increase. I guess we covered auxiliary funds had a slight increase as well, and then just wanted to Jack, the restricted fund, the restricted purposes funds also were increased by about 600,000 too. So across those three funds, all having a positive increase, is going to drive this number up. As far as specific, variances within those funds, again, Ken's team's probably in a better position to analyze that more thoroughly.
Within the CAFR, there's a couple of schedules we can point you to that will show, kind of the overall picture of the health of the district and kind of some of the things that fed into that.
Perhaps you could isolate those for you and send them to me.
Ideally, I just need a one-pager. Top
Not a
level,
thesis?
not a thesis. I can follow the numbers and,
Sure.
It's one page.
Sure.
You can just summarize, even on this one page, this delta represents this fund balance, this fund, so I can get a total, that's all. That's all I need, a one pager, I don't need a lot of good stuff.
Can you answer that question?
I can't answer it now, but I can go back and research it and.
Yeah, we'll get you the best.
Okay.
Good question.
And we'll work with Ken.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Put that in the update.
Yeah.
Second question,
Yeah.
can you go back to the reserves that we have?
Here?
33% and 31%. Our board policy says 25%. This represents 4 months. I've asked this question before. Is 4 months reasonable to have as reserve for an institution of this size?
Yeah, I think the recommendation that we see out there is between 3 and 6 months. I mean, this is a picture of how many months could you go with zero revenues?
Yes.
So obviously it's not something that's very likely, although drops, have happened in the funding, but typically.
Just happened. I was going to say, so given the state of Illinois, 3 to 6 months is a good
right.
idea.
But this would be with no tuition,
Right.
no charges for services, nothing coming into the institution. How long could you live, and continue to pay and, incur expenditure? So you're probably right in line with, where you should be and where your peers are. Again, we say about 3 to 6%, and that's GFOA's recommendation as well.
And then the other way to answer that question has to do with what the bond rating agencies expect you to have if you're a AAA versus a AA versus a single A.
Okay.
So we can get that analysis to you as well.
Yeah.
One pager is good.
Put all that on one page.
I can follow it. I can follow the trail. Just one page.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, all right. So back to the slide, I was just about to kind of give an overview. We talked a little bit about the student financial aid that Dr. Weber mentioned that there was no issues and that there have been issues in the past. You've come a long way in that area. So unmodified opinions over the the government auditing standards and uniform grant guidance that governs how you spend and report federal funds. We tested only the student financial aid cluster. You have many federal programs coming through the college and many grants, but we really focus our time on the student financial aid cluster because it's by far the largest. So no issues noted here. And again, management has always been proactive in addressing deficiencies. There was something that came up with student financial aid last year, but again, there's so much detailed to the requirements of student financial aid that there always is a little something popping up. So last year there was an item that was corrected before this year and not repeated. So management's been great to work with from that standpoint. So the last slide we just wanted to cover, just a kind of quick overall results of the foundation audit. We understand that you're not the board of the foundation, but just as a kind of an overview, this report is included in the financial statements of the district, again, as a component unit. It meets the definitions for accounting and reporting purposes to be presented within your CAFR. So again, we do issue a separate opinion on the foundation under separate cover, and that was a clean opinion as well. So we work with Karen and her team, alongside the college audit, same timeline and same team of people to work through these. And there's a couple deficiencies that were noted this year. Again, control deficiencies. These are the lowest level findings that you can have, if you even want to call them findings. And these are items that we, again, discussed with management of the foundation as well as management of the college as part of our exit meeting. And so there'll be corrective action taken on these.
So how does one have an investment that's outside the foundation's investment policy?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so that's actually an issue.
I didn't know if manager wanted to.
This is rough.
That's actually an issue that came up on Ken's taken on a project fairly recently to evaluate the holdings of the foundation. It is, as it says, just one of the holdings. Ken would probably be in a better position to speak to that. but it is just one. It's an isolated.
The foundation has a well-diversified portfolio of investments done through a very reputable firm. And I think there's one of the investments in a fund called BlackRock High Yield Fund. Very small percentage of the portfolio, but the investment policy of the foundation says you can only have fixed income instruments invested in things with an investment grade rating or higher. So the foundation really just needs to go back and modify its policy to allow for that particular type of investment, or it just needs to divest itself of that particular investment. But it's a typical part of a normal portfolio. It's a diversified portfolio, and I think it's just an anomaly of the investment policy itself. So the foundation board can decide whether or not they want to get a little more conservative and have them just invest in that investment, or modify their investment policy to allow for that high risk bond fund.
Maybe this is an unfair question to ask of administrators, but the foundation board is made up of a bunch of wealthy, moneyed people, and I imagine a lot of them have their own investment contacts and interests, we'll call them. And is there kind of a natural tug of war between foundation board members of who should be doing what and where should the money be invested?
I think it's the foundation's finance committee just doing its due diligence to make sure that it's comporting itself to the policies, and that's what I've been asked to do, is to just make sure that they're investing it appropriately and benchmarking it and following all the rules that are expected. And this is just one observation that popped up.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a
Thank you.
conflict of interest statements and all that sort of thing.
What's the value of that investment?
Oh, it's $3 million overall. I mean,
The whole portfolio is about $4 million, so I'm guessing this must be 30,000. It's a small amount.
Well, that helps.
I thought there was a piece of legislation that actually identifies what foundations can invest in.
I know there's a statute that defines it for us. I'm not aware of one that tells what an independent foundation can do.
Maybe you should come to our
Yeah,
foundation thing next month as well.
sure.
Yeah, because I'm thinking institutionally, we have those kind of partners.
We do.
that-
But the foundation's an independent 501c3. So
Right.
But they're still on it wrong.
Probably
I'll wait till I
not.
go through the
To
Yeah.
training.
give you an
that's
example,
it.
I've reviewed the portfolio of the AACC, American Association of Community College Boards, and what they invested in. And they invest in a similar asset through their diversified portfolio as
You
well.
must have forgot where you live. This is Illinois.
I know, but I'm just saying, when you think of a 501c3 from a community college organization, if you look at their portfolio of maybe $10 million worth of investments, they're in that particular fund as well, but their policy allows it.
Right.
Our foundation policy doesn't. So it's either fixing the policy or changing the investment.
Make sure we're
I'm on
in
that committee,
compliance.
actually, now.
Okay.
So yeah, to wrap up, no significant issues on the foundation audit, and again, we'll be presenting to their board separately in November.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for
And
having
the
us.
last report is just the fourth quarter investment accountability report, fiscal accountability report, and it's essentially similar information we've already provided. So if it's okay, we're presenting at the October 18th board retreat. I'd be happy to go over this report in more detail at our retreat and save time tonight. Or if anybody has any questions on this report, I'd be happy to answer them now.
How about if we reserve it for, you're gonna see it in 3 weeks, and we're gonna walk you through it as we prepare. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. President?
Nope, that concludes my report.
What is that date, that 18th?
It's, I think what we're gonna do is do the groundbreaking, the soft groundbreaking at 5 o'clock, is it? 5
It's
o'clock.
Is
And
it
then,
the 25th or the 18th?
It's
4
the
o'clock.
4 o'clock is the date?
18th.
it was always the 18th.
No, it wasn't.
What's the 25th?
The 25th is a
Was
board
never the
meeting.
18th. Did you change the date?
Yes, we did change it. It was originally in November. We moved it to the 18th to accommodate the legislators, so it would be before the
Oh, I
election.
could take-
Yeah.
Well, we need to get that out, I don't even have it on my calendar.
It wasn't an
It was in the
update.
update.
It wasn't an update, once already also, but,
It's a Tuesday
That's the
night.
legislative dinner.
right.
Yes, it's a
So
legislative
Well, the
day.
original
Same
date that
thing.
you picked that was on there was Rosh Hashanah.
Right.
And that could present a problem to some of the legislators too, so then the date was moved.
Yeah, okay, it's the 18th, and what time does everybody
So
have?
4 o'clock is the soft opening,
Right.
5 o'clock is a legislative reception,
It's a reception, not a
and then
dinner.
6 o'clock is the planning retreat.
And then 6 o'clock you're going to the night. Okay.
Okay.
And we'll have you out of there by 10:30.
Okay.